Hello and welcome. My name's Andy Crook, and my mission is to help garage owners become more successful in business. How do I do that? Most weeks, I try to go live on a training topic on one of the 5 pillars of business as I see it. This week, we're in the systems pillar, and we're talking about systems or suffer. How having a system saves yourself time, energy. So without further ado, we'll get on with tonight's training topic, all about systemize or suffer, and how systems save yourself time, energy, and money. Because let's face it, running the garage today isn't what it was 10 years ago. In fact, it's much tougher. The jobs are more complicated, and customer expectations absolutely soared. And if you feel like you're spending your whole day putting out fires or explaining the same thing over and over again, you're not alone. But there is one tool that can change the game for your business, and that's a system. Systems improve effectiveness, saving you time, energy, and money. Yes, I know it doesn't sound very sexy, but systems are what separate the chaotic garages from the ones that run like clockwork. The garages where the owner can take time off, and the team doesn't call every 15 minutes asking where the locking wheel nut is. So let's break it down and show you why having a system saves yourself time, energy, and money, and how you can start small and still get big results. But before we do that, quick reminder of the difference between a system and a process, because they can seem the same and they're often talked about interchangeably. And I find myself doing it all the time. But how I remember what a system is and what a process is basically this definitions. Systems are the bridge between the person or the technology and the process is the steps required to complete the task. And systems improve effectiveness and processes improve efficiency. So they're similar, but not quite the same. And it's easy to get the two mixed up when you're talking about systemization. But I suppose the big thing to think about is a system is really the mechanism for doing the process. And we'll make that a little bit clearer as we go forward. So if systems save yourself time, energy, and money, that's a great place to start. So time. You probably feel that you don't have enough of it. But here's a hint for you. Everybody has the same amount of time, just 24 hours a day. It's what you do with that time that makes the difference. So if you ever find yourself answering the same customer questions over and over again, such as, how much is an MOT? Can I wait while you do it? Do you take cards? Etc., etc. You know, the sort of questions that you find yourself repetitively answering. So now imagine having a pre-written message or email template that answers all of the frequently asked questions for your business. This simple system saves 5 minutes per customer. And if you see 10 customers a day, that's 50 minutes, nearly an hour of your time saved every day. And that's just the start. The system could be as simple as that, but it also could be a checklist for taking bookings over the phone, or a flow chart for new customer follow-ups, or a simple documented process for every repair type you offer. It doesn't need to be fancy. It needs to be repeatable. And that's the key thing. When we think about the system, it's normally the enabler for the process. So we think about energy, and you need to stop yourself from running on empty. Energy is what gives you your edge, and we all have a limited amount of energy. And if yours is spent chasing invoices, solving staff dramas, or explaining the same things 10 times in a row, you're going to burn out. No question about it. But a system takes the weight off. Let's say your techs often forget to add parts to the job or job sheet. That means that you expend energy every day checking jobs on job cards or asking them if they've added all the parts and all the consumables. That's what you're spending your energy on. But instead, you could introduce a check on the garage management system or a workshop that requires the tech to confirm with the front of house before the job card is closed and the invoice is raised. One tiny change in your system, but a big energy gain. So we finish with money. Save more money before you make more money, because a penny saved is the first penny earned. So let's talk about money, but not the big stuff, not the capital expenditure like diagnostic kit or lifts. What we're talking about here is a death by 1,000 cuts. You know, the sort of thing that happens. Discounts given because the customer didn't know the price. The customers you lose due to lack of communication with customers. The missed upsell opportunities on brakes, tires, or defective lights, etc. And they're all preventable with, yeah, you've guessed it, with systems. Imagine you set up an authorization system that spells out the price and the time frames for every job. In fact, a job can't go forward without that authorization, without the customer being made aware of how much and how long it's going to take. That sort of thing is what I'm talking about here when we talk about an authorization system. It doesn't have to be fancy to begin with. It just needs to happen. Or you introduce vehicle health checks to ensure roadworthiness, but it also protects your relationship with the customer. We've done a training topic on this before. But introducing a system where every vehicle has a health check will result in those upsells on brakes, tires, and defective lights. And it also ensures the vehicle leaves your workshop roadworthy. Or you can set simple workshop reminders in your software to flag MOT expiry dates and send those customers automatically follow-up reminders to book with you. No losing of the customers. And if you think about how much money that could save you in lost customers, in upsells, in not having to discount jobs because the customer didn't know how much it was, you're starting to get the idea of how having systems save you time, energy, and money. But the thing is, you've already got lots of systems. However, they only exist in your head. You need to document them so that others can access them. So let's start with one task and see what it's like to build a system. Because once you document it, implement it, you ask the people closest to the task to come up with the iterations to improve it. And this is, I think, the misconception with systems that a lot of garage owners have, is that when I talk to them about systems, I see the eyes glass over, and we'll talk about the reasons why people don't implement them in a second. But probably the biggest one is, I don't have time to build systems. Well, if you don't have times to build systems, that's probably the reason why you need to build a system. But we'll get to that in a second. But it's not down to you as the business owner to build the entire system. There is a bit that's down to you. And there's a little bit at the beginning which is probably that you as the garage owner need to be involved in a big way. And then you can pass it on to your team. So how does it work? So remember those parts that I just spoke about. That you're constantly chasing text to enter on the job sheets. You know, the sort of thing that happens in the garage world, where let's say you've ordered brake discs. The motor factor has told you there's a choice. You've ordered both sets. They're on the system, but you don't know which ones were fitted. And that's a big problem because there might be a price difference between them. So let's start with something like that you've identified in your business as an opportunity to implement a system. So let's start with that task. So the task is ensuring the right parts are allocated on the job cards or job sheets. The first thing you have to do as the business owner is identify the task. So that's the first job. The next thing you have to do is you have to document it. You need to write down what you do to ensure that happens on every job. You know, that sounds, if you think about it, a lot like a process. So what you're probably going to document in the majority of cases is the process that you go through to make that happen. But once you've documented it, you can now let your team do the heavy lifting, and we'll show you how in a second. But what I'd like you to do, if you're going to do this sort of thing, is to calculate how much time do you think you could save if you didn't need to do this yourself. So when you think about building a system, When you're documenting down what you're doing, think about how many times you do that in a typical day or a typical week in your business. And if someone else did that job, how much time could you save? And this is where you get your team involved. You've got a documented process, and you want to get the people closest to the task involved. You can get everyone involved, but you really need the people who are closest to this task. So in this case, it's the techs. And so you're going to say to the techs, what one thing could we do to make this easier? And their answers might surprise you, and they might even make your life easier over. So in this case, it could be something as simple as a checkbox that the tech must agree to close the job sheet. And it might be as simple as that. Unless they tick the box, and they tick the box to say that they have identified which parts were fitted and which parts need to be returned. It could be as simple as that. And by ticking that, they're saying they've done it. So if they haven't done it, you can have some sort of remedial actions because they're saying they're doing it. And it just reminds them that it's a step they must take. And then they can look at the process they need to go through because it's documented. Or somebody else might come up with, well, why don't we have a fixed consumables price for each job type? So if we're doing a service, there are certain consumables that are always used. A percentage of the total price of a can of grease may be allocated to each service. You get the idea. But these could be suggestions from your team, things you haven't thought about. But remember, your energy is your edge. Your ability to lead, plan, and improve relies on it. And systems protect your energy like a fuse protects a circuit. Remember, burnout of a circuit is a real possibility, but so is the burnout of the owner. You only have a certain amount of energy. So with the techs coming up with one iteration of how to improve it, you now move on to the front of house. And you ask them the same question. What one thing would ensure that the correct parts always end up on the invoice? And probably the answer is going to be some form of checklist. So you ask your front of house team to create a 5-point checklist that's going to be gone through by them on every job. That's what parts were ordered, what parts were fitted, the markup or margin of those parts, the returns, and that consumables being added. There's your 5-point checklist. And if every job they do that checklist, they check what parts were ordered, what parts were fitted, the markup and margin, returns and consumables. That's it. They've got a checklist. The techs have to tick a box to say that they've identified what parts were fitted. And then it's over to the front of house to do all the things that you were checking on every job because you knew this wasn't happening properly all of the time. And that's it. Try it for 1 week. So you've got 2 iterations of the system now, but making sure that you don't need to check every job anymore. And then implement it. Try it for a week. Measure the difference. If it works, great. If it doesn't, ask again, how can it be fixed? And this is where you keep iterating to improve. So parts and consumables is just one area where you're leaking money. But how much more could you save by implementing systems such as this within your business? Over time, these tiny saves stack up, compounding into higher profits, but most importantly, lower stress, less firefighting, and more time to work on the business, saving yourself time, energy, and money. But what's stopping you? And it's always the same thing. It started. Most garage owners know they should systemize, but here is what I hear when I start talking about systems. And the number one thing I hear is, I don't have time. And the reason you don't have time is your lack of systemization. The time you spend writing a checklist today saves you an hour next week and every week from then on in. Can you imagine how that builds up over the systems that you build and the amount of time that you can save? The next thing I often get told is, it won't work for my team. But systems empower people and get your teams involved to iterate and improve on the basic idea. Remember, all you're going to come up with is the tasks that you're going to systemize within your business, and you're going to document the steps that you take to make it happen. And then you hand it over to the team, and then they look at the steps that they need to take to ensure that happens. Support them, encourage them, And yet you'll be surprised at what can happen and who takes ownership of what. Good systems free your teams to focus on what they're doing best, which is fixing cars, serving customers. And remember, the systems are the bridge between them and the task, the process. The third answer, or most common answer, is probably it's just too complicated. So start simple. Just a pen and a piece of paper or a whiteboard. Start creating checklists, flowcharts. Just document the steps required to complete a task, which is your process. And once you have a process, work out how you can implement that process in your business. The link between the process, the technology, or person, that is what a system is. Use video or record someone using the task. Use this as the document in order to document the other steps. It doesn't need to be fancy, but think about what tools you already have at your disposal to help with this. The list is endless. You can even use AI. So, final thought about systemize or suffer. The consequences of not systemizing your business is that everything then depends on you, which will result in burnout. Having systems reduces your workload so you can spend time on the stuff that matters. Talking with customers, training your team, working on your business. It's the difference between having a job where your garage runs you or a business where you run your garage. So here's the challenge. Pick one area that you want to make an improvement. An area where you could save yourself time, energy, or money. Or maybe you could save yourself time, energy, and money. And use the Fix This First quiz to identify your lowest level need, because you really want to start to implement systems if you're starting to build systems somewhere at the lowest level need in your business. So create one system that solves a problem at your lowest level. Once you've created the system, and it's simple to do, remember the first thing you have to do is you look at the task that you're doing repeatedly all the time. You're always doing this one thing, is write down the steps you take in order to that to happen. You've now documented the process. Now what you're going to do is look at the people closest to that task and ask them how they would do this. How would they implement the process that you've got into their daily routine so they don't forget to do it, so that you don't have to do it, and implement, and then ask them to iterate so it's always improving. If you're teaching them to do something that you normally do that they haven't done, the teaching process is similar. It's document, demonstrate, and then get them to duplicate. So it's by documenting the steps, you've already started on the teaching system. But that's further down the line. Often what you're doing when you're doing repetitive tasks at the lower level of your business is you're actually running around doing stuff that the team should be doing. So think about that. Think about what task it is, document it, then implement it by sharing it with the team, asking them to iterate to improve it. And you'll find that the system comes out of that because you'll have documented the process. But always seek to improve. And before long, you might even start enjoying your Fridays again. Then it could be your weekends. And then, dare I say it, the odd holiday. Or you might even be able to take a month off or even longer because your business runs without you. If I've made you think even a little bit about how to implement systems in your business or the reason why you need to systemize or you will suffer, then I've done my job. Remember, what's stopping you is starting, and if you should, you must. See you next time. Thanks for watching.